Translation as Discovery by Sujit Mukherjee. Now we know Sujit Mukherjee as a writer, and he's quite famous for his theories on translation. Born in Patna in 1930, he grew up in his original town and later moved to Delhi, Hyderabad, and different other Indian cities. Well, most of us know him as a prolific writer, but the two books that he had written, Translation as Discovery in 1981 and Translation as Recovery, which was published posthumously in 2004. These two books told the world that Sujit Mukherjee was also a keen observer, and he had a passion towards translation. Now, if you see the text, Translation as Discovery, the text talks about a different type of theory regarding translation. The two theories that we saw before this, Benjamin's and Ramanujan's, of course, was quite different. They never gave importance to the exact word-to-word or iconic translation, as Ramanujan says. But Sujit Mukherjee had a different theory regarding translation. Now, he says that the translation of a literary text demands close reading, which means reading for translation, according to him, is the most highest level of reading. Now, he doesn't simply say that, he gives us another 5 reasons as to why he calls reading for translation as the highest form of reading. One, because in this reading, the translator has to interpret the text reasonably, maintaining all its meanings. 2, he has to restructure his interpretation in another language. 3, the translator has to strive to approximate or keep the original structure as it is. 4, the translator cannot take anything away from the original. He or she cannot subtract anything from the original. And 5, only things can be added to it, and not just ordinary things, but extraordinary things can be added to the translation. Now, here we have some resonance to the theories said by Walter Benjamin and Ramanujan, where adding to translation creates a new art. Now, our theorist Mukherjee throws before the readers 6 different types of translation of 3 lines from a Bangla poem, and these 3 lines are translated in 6 different ways. And then he tells us how these different ways of using words in translation can change the essence of the entire poem or that entire of the lines, and how this can create different meanings in translation. Now, the original Bangla poem had the first 3 words as thousands of years. Now, this from Bangla, when it was translated into English, the first version that we have here is thousands of years I have walked the roads of earth. In the second version, second translation, an article is pushed on in the front part of the phrase thousands of years. It becomes a thousands of years I have wandered upon the earth. In the third translation, the entire phrase is taken away from the translation and it is brought to the end of the sentence. I have walked the paths of life for 1,000 years. Now, Mukherjee tells us that in Bangla, they don't have a definite or an indefinite article. As in English, we have a, an, and the. Now, these articles are not present in the Bangla language. So, therefore, when you suddenly add an English article in front of thousands of years, the meaning changes or it drifts away from the original. In the first example, the first translation, Hazar Sal is being changed into thousands of years. But when an article is pushed into the beginning, thousands of years, the problem is that this unspecific duration of time, which the original Bangla poem showcases, is taken away. That meaning is taken away away from the translation. So the moment a is added, the article a is added in front of thousands of years, a specificity is comes into play, and that unspecific duration of time mentioned in the original poem slowly fades away. And in the third translation, when 1,000 years are brought at the end of the sentence, again the same thing happens here. The article a again creates a feel that 1,000 years is a specific period of time, whereas in the original Bangla version, Hazar Sal for the poet meant unspecific duration of time. The fourth translation completely omits the phrase thousands, 1,000 of years. Now again what happens here is that the entire dramatic look of the original Bangla poem is taken away from this version, and thus the exact essence of the lines are not grasped by the readers. The fifth version, the word for is added instead of an article, and for thousands of years I have walked this earth. Again what happens here is that the word for, when it comes in front of the phrase thousands of years, it creates a effect wherein the reader unconsciously thinks that again thousands of years is a measurable period of time, whereas the original poem says or uses the word hazar as an immeasurable word of time. The last translation, the entire phrase is again taken off, just as in the translation, the fourth translation. But instead of thousands of years, one word is used here, aeons. For aeons I roamed the roads of this earth. Now, the word aeons have different shades of meaning, which completely takes away the play of the phrase thousands of years in the text, in the original text. For one thing that Mukherjee tells us, aeons is not a word that we commonly use in English, whereas thousand is a commonly used word in English, and in Bangla, hazar is a constantly used word, whereas aeons is not a commonly used word as we write or read. And two, the word aeons creates a sense of wherein The exact shade of thousands of years does not come into play here. Again, the word aeons does mean that it is a measurable duration of time. So, as you see here, the phrase for thousands of years is actually changed in all the 6 different versions. B and C lacks the specificity, the unspecificity of of the phrase thousands of years. It's taken off by the article A. The first and the fifth translation suggest again a very indefinite extension with thousands of years, and there are so many shades of meanings that change in all the 6 translations. So Mukherjee tells us that the same poem, if you look up again, that again the use of verb describing movement also creates a sense of different meaning in the poem. For example, you can see that in the beginning, the first verse tells us about the verbs used are walked and journeyed. The second translation, the verb for movement is journeyed. The third translation, it is walked and wandered. Fourth, walked and traveled. Fifth, roamed and journeyed. In between the third version, the entire verb for locomotion or movement is taken off from the translation. So the problem here that Mukherjee tells us is that the movements in every translation, there are 2 movements that happen. Now both the movements suggest drifting from place to place without a purpose, but the words that we have here in front of us in all the 6 translations, maybe all the 5 translations, because one translation does not have any verb describing the movement. So all the other 5 translations, the word or words like walked, journeyed, traveled, they all have a specific purpose. It is not just moving from place to place without a particular purpose. The only word that is close to the meaning of the original is roamed, wherein roaming means going from place to place without a particular purpose. Other than that, all the other verbs used here in the translations suggest a different meaning, suggest moving from place to place with a set plan. So Mukherjee that no student of literature can manage with the knowledge of only one language. The translator should know both the languages so that the exact meaning of the original text can be retained in the target text. He also tells us that a literary text usually uses words, and when the words are put together, a totality of meaning is produced. Mukherjee tells us that this totality of literature and discovering this totality of meaning is what lies in the process of translation. So hence, a translator is tested twice according to Mukherjee. The translator has a twofold process to put in before a translation is done. One, a translator is tested for what he or she makes of the original text. And two, the translator's command over both the languages. So both these areas are tested in a piece of translation. That is why Mukherjee adds that if the translator is also a poet, then his command over the usages of language will be much better than a translator who is just only a translator. So according to Mukherjee, a translator's translation becomes much better if the translator is a poet who is, or maybe a translator who is a prolific writer. Because for such a writer, the words and the different shades of meanings, the translator, being a poet or a prolific writer, would be more sensitive towards the shades of meaning that words signify. So he ends the essay by telling the readers that it is actually this this awareness of both the language that actually betters the translation, and it would be very good if the translator is also a poet or a prolific writer, so that he or she is in touch with the usages of language in a better way.